The White House has confirmed that President Cyril Ramaphosa will be meeting US President Joe Biden in Washington later this month, in a meeting that's expected to partly focus on their differences over Russia. The Biden administration is looking for African nations, South Africa in particular, to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine and join Western sanctions against Moscow. Nick Harper is our correspondent in Washington.
The two leaders last spoke by phone in April. In announcing President Ramaphosa's visit on September the 16th, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that this face-to-face meeting would be a chance to build on what she termed as a productive call 5 months ago. Now, officially, according to the White House announcement, they'll be discussing opportunities to deepen cooperation in trade and investment, infrastructure, climate and energy, and health. And we're told it'll be a time to reaffirm the importance of the two countries' enduring partnership. South Africa remains America's largest trade partner on the African continent, with two-way trade totaling almost $18 billion. South Africa also plays host to around 600 US businesses, many of them using the country as their regional base. But unofficially, the Biden administration has been hoping for more commitment from South Africa over the war in Ukraine. US officials have been disappointed that African nations have remained neutral on the issue, rather than condemning Russia's actions. At the United Nations in New York, South Africa abstained in a UN vote to publicly condemn Russia. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visited South Africa last month, where he pointed out that Russia's blockade of Ukrainian ports is negatively and disproportionately affecting African countries. President Ramaphosa is expected to remain in the US after his visit to Washington and travel to New York to attend this year's UN General Assembly. Nick Harper, SABC News, Washington.
Well, for some analysis about this trip, we're now joined by Professor David Monyae, the Associate Professor of International Relations and Political Sciences, and also the Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Good evening.
All right, so how important is this visit by President Ramaphosa for South Africa and for the United States?
This visit is quite important for both countries, given the fact that the two countries' trade is very high. South Africa, as mentioned, is US #1 trading partner on the African continent, and US is in the range of number 3, 4 for South Africa. And therefore, given the history since 1984, I think there's a number of areas in which the two countries have been having a great relationship. But over the times, I think we've seen the downgrade on part of the US from a strategic partnership lowered to from deputy president level to ministerial, and at times absolutely nothing. I think we've seen with the vaccine crisis that the US was absolutely not on South Africa's side. We've seen a number of areas where the two countries are not really in tandem in terms of their position on issues affecting global peace and security.
All right, we'll unpack some of those just now, but let's start with the big one, I guess. And I suppose it's the position that South Africa has taken on Ukraine that President Biden will probably want to have some conversation with President Ramaphosa.
Well, indeed, but this particular matter, it's quite difficult for President Ramaphosa to pay a visit to White House and come back home and change completely his foreign policy. Given the fact that, he's going to ANC's electoral conference in December. South Africa is a member of BRICS. South Africa has an independent foreign policy. And I don't think a mere visit to White House will change the status quo as far as South Africa's foreign policy is concerned. South Africa will continue to be neutral on these issues. And that has nothing to do with the United States or anything. It is its own strategic interest on global matters.
I get the sense sometimes, and maybe you can correct me, but sometimes there's a thinking with these superpowers that if they convince South Africa is the gateway to persuading the continent, as if South Africa has that power.
Not really. It has influence. However, if you look, the votes, the entire continent was divided. But by and large, I think bulk of African countries are considering taking a neutral position. And this has absolutely nothing to do with the United States. It has to do with the position that has been taken by Western powers. For the past 2 decades, I think they've been bombing Iraq, they've been bombing Syria, Yemen has been bombed, and our own country, Libya, has been bombed in 2011. And the position that they've been taking are contradictory to what is happening in Libya, in Ukraine as we speak. And therefore, for South Africa, I think it's just a question of standing its ground on issues of global peace and security with an aim of ensuring that there is transformation of the United Nations system itself, allowing Africa to have a much bigger say and democratization of the entire system. As it stands, is the hegemony of the United States and Western power. And I don't think South Africa can join that club at the moment. I don't see that happening.
So by and large, they're going to agree to disagree. But I guess a question that people might raise is, why is this issue so important? Because Israel, South Africa and America are on opposite sides, pretty much. Cuba, another example. What is it about the Ukraine-Russia conflict that the United States wants to rally as many people against Russia?
Russia is a key member. It's a country with more than 6,000 nuclear warheads. It's a country that played a critical role, and it's not the first time that the United States is at a clash with Russia, the then Soviet Union, I think, throughout the entire Cold War. And therefore, I think for the United States is to really downgrade the power of Moscow in terms of its influence on the African continent. But in real terms, as said by the Minister of Foreign Affairs, South Africa's trade with Russia it's very small. I mean, we're talking about 4 billion plus. There isn't much. So it's not about money or anything. It's about principles, foreign policy independence, for South Africa and the African continent, and ensure that South Africa continues to play a meaningful role in bringing peace and security. And the chances are high that even though disagree with the United States, there are so many other areas where Pretoria agrees with Washington.
Excuse me, what can President Ramaphosa bring back from America?
There are so many issues. The United States is expanding its trade. Unfortunately, it's coming in within not just anti-Russia and anti-China. I think you're going to see pushback from Pretoria that the United States need to enter in relationship with Pretoria, independent of China and Russia. And therefore, I think when it comes to the two countries, United States is expanding its investments, which is welcome. South Africa needs that, given high unemployment, poverty, and inequality in South Africa. More investments in trade, in infrastructure, energy, and health. We need those areas, and the United States remains the superpower in the world. And therefore, I think President Ramaphosa will engage President Biden and beyond the business community in the United States, who are going to play a critical role in South Africa's economy.
All right, if we take the politics out of the equation, what can Joe Biden extract from South Africa?
There are a number of areas the United States needs support from South Africa. Other than Ukraine, there are so many other issues on climate change, and we're heading to Cairo with COP27 that is coming up. I think South Africa, United States, and quite a number of other countries do indeed share a common position and the need to protect the environment. And South Africa would really engage the United States to ensure that South Africa and the entire continent can gradually deal with the issues of environment in a much more responsible way.
All right, so a critical time for the president himself, but he has to keep his mind on the job at hand in America. Will Russia be watching this trip as a BRICS partner?
Well, indeed. I think you see the trips made by the U.S. Secretary of State to South Africa and the South Africa's Minister of Defense going to Moscow to a conference, and now having President Ramaphosa going to Washington. All these demonstrate that South Africa is an independent country and its foreign policy is not swayed by Beijing, nor Moscow, or even Washington itself. It has an independent foreign policy, and it will take position based on its interests, as enshrined in its own constitution, as well as the interests of the African continent. I think those are core areas that informs President Ramaphosa's engagement with President Biden on the 16th of September.
All right. A question I should have asked you at the beginning really is the timing of this. Normally these kinds of visits are planned well in advance. One doesn't get a sense that this might have been the case this time.
I really do not think, but chances are very high when Secretary of State Blinken was in South Africa, he might have had a message to President Ramaphosa. In this instance, that's how things do take place, and also taking advantage of the ongoing United Nations General Assembly that is taking place, the main trip to US this time on the political calendar of the president. It is the address of the United Nations General Assembly. And therefore, I think getting into White House, I think one would then do all those things at the same time.
All right, and that's where we'll leave it. Always good talking to you. Thank you so much for your time, Prof.
Thank you.
All right, that's Professor Monyae speaking to us about President Ramaphosa's imminent trip to the United States to have a chat with President Joe Biden about many issues of the collaboration between the two countries and, of course, the Russia-Ukraine conflict.